Sustainability is a term that relates to the goal of achieving a world that meets the needs of its present inhabitants while preserving resources for future generations. Defining sustainability can be difficult because the term means different things to different groups. For most, sustainable agriculture can best be described as an umbrella term that encompasses food production and consumption practices that don't harm the environment, that do support agricultural communities, and that are healthy for the consumer. The concept of sustainability isn't new to agricultural science, practice, or even policy. In a 1990 piece of legislation known as the Farm Bill, the U.S. federal government defined sustainable agriculture as an integrated system of plant and animal production that satisfies human needs for food and fiber and for fabric and other uses. Sustainable agriculture also makes the most efficient use of non-renewable resources, sustains the economic viability of farm operations, and supports the quality of life for farmers and society as a whole. In other words, the practice of sustainable agriculture strives to avoid conventional farming methods. Sustainability includes a focus on biodiversity among both crops and livestock, conservation and preservation to replenish the soil, air, and water, animal welfare, and fair treatment and wages for farm workers. Sustainable agriculture also encourages the health of consumers by rejecting extensive use of pesticides and fertilizers and promoting the consumption of organic, locally produced food. Greenwashing is a derisive term similar to whitewashing for a corporation or industry falsely utilizing a pro-environmental image or message to expand its market base. Sustainability depends not only on agricultural producers, but also on consumers. Increasing the consumption of more locally grown produce by 10% would save thousands of gallons in fossil fuel each year. This chapter will look at ways you can adjust your dietary selections to benefit not only your body and mind, but also to help sustain the planet for future generations. Advances in technology have also affected what we eat and how we feel about our food, so it can be helpful to examine theories and customs related to diet and nutrition across different civilizations and time periods. The basic diet of the ancient era consisted of cereals, legumes, oil and wine supplemented by vegetables and meat or fish, honey, and salt. During the Middle Ages, poor people consumed meager diets that consisted of small game supplemented with either barley, oat, or rye, while the wealthy had regular access to meat and fish along with wheat. During the Industrial Revolution, diets became more varied, partly because of the development of refrigeration and other forms of food preservation. In the contemporary era, many people have access to a wide variety of food that is grown locally or shipped from far-off places. Following a nomadic lifestyle, early people hunted, fished, and gathered fruit and wild berries, depending on their location and the availability of wild plants and wild game. They developed weapons and tools, including spears, nets, traps, fishing tackle, and the bow and arrow to aid in these tasks. About 10,000 years ago, people began to cultivate crops and domesticate livestock in an area known today as the Middle East. Agriculture not only enriched the diet of these early people, it also led to the birth of civilization as farmers began to settle into sizable, stable communities. One of the most fertile regions of the ancient world was located along the Nile River Valley in ancient Egypt, yielding several harvests per year. Even poor Egyptians ate a reasonably healthy diet that included fish, vegetables, and fruit. However, meat was primarily a privilege of the rich. Thousands of years ago, across an area that encompasses Mexico and Central America today, farmers cultivated three major plants: squash, beans, and maize. Today we know maize as corn. These crops proved to be both complementary and sustainable. Thousands of years later, many small farmers continued to cultivate these three crops, sometimes called the Three Sisters. In ancient Rome, differences in social standing affected the diet. While breakfast and lunch were typically light meals that were often consumed in taverns and cafes, dinners were eaten at home and were taken much more seriously. Wealthy senators, rich Romans, and landowners ate meals with multiple courses, including appetizers, entrees, and desserts, such as roasted ostrich or pheasant, out of bronze, gold, or silver dishes. By contrast, people of the lower classes ate mostly bread and cereals out of clay dishes. Eating habits of most people during the medieval era depended mainly on location and financial status. The common diet consisted of either wheat, meat, or fish, depending on location. Lower classes consumed cereals and grains, porridge, and gruel supplemented with seasonal fruits, vegetables, and herbs. Wine, beer, and cider were also common, and were often safer to drink than the unsanitized, untreated water. The Crusaders brought back new foods and spices, exposing Europeans of the Middle Ages to unusual flavors. Cooking with exotic spices such as black pepper, saffron, and ginger became associated with wealth because they were expensive and had to be imported. Food preservation consisted mostly of drying, salting, and smoking. Pickling involved the use of fermentation to preserve food. Almost all areas of the country had agrarian economies dictated by the harvesting seasons prior to the 1800s. In the 1800s, seed drill, the steel plow, and the reaper made it easier to cultivate crops, and developments in rail and refrigeration made it easier to package, ship, and store food. These and other changes ushered in the modern era and affected the production and consumption of food. The invention and refinement of the refrigerator and freezer made it possible for people to store food for much longer periods, also allowing for the transportation of food over great distances. Prior to this, to store foods for long periods, people used ice boxes or kept vegetables such as potatoes, onions, and winter squash in cellars during the winter months. During the Great Depression, the United States faced incredible food shortages and many people went hungry. Extreme droughts turned parts of the Midwest into a dust bowl, where farmers struggled to raise crops. Millions of Americans were unemployed or underemployed and were forced to wait in long lines for free food. The government worked to provide for and protect the people, including providing subsidies and support for suffering farmers. During World War II, people voluntarily made do with less to ensure that soldiers training and fighting overseas had the supplies they needed. Government programs included rationing food, particularly meat, butter, and sugar. And the media encouraged families to plant their own fruits and vegetables in their backyard gardens, and they called those victory gardens. Currently, almost 50% of the world's labor is employed in agriculture. However, in the U.S., less than 2% of Americans produce food for the rest of the population. And most farms are no longer small-scale or family-owned, as large-scale agribusiness is typical for both crop cultivation and livestock rearing. Consumers have begun to seek out organic and locally grown foods from smaller-scale farms that are less harmful to the environment and animals. Kitchen appliances have contributed to the convenience of food preparation and the kinds of meals that people enjoy cooking and eating. Diet trends over time. Today, consumers can choose from a huge variety of dietary choices that were not available in the past. In the Western world, especially in North America, food products are also relatively cheap. As a result, there is much less disparity between the diets of the lower and upper classes than in the past. Agriculture is one of the world's largest industries, generating trillions of dollars and employing billions of people. In the United States alone, customers spend about $500 billion annually on food products at grocery stores and supermarkets. The food industry includes a complex collection of businesses that touches on everything from crop cultivation to manufacturing and processing, from marketing and advertising to distribution and shipment, and to food regulation. The food system is a network of farmers and related operations, including food processing, wholesale and distribution, retail, industry technology, and marketing. The milk industry, for example, includes the farm that raises the milk cows, the milking facility that extracts the milk, the processing company that pasteurizes and packages the milk, the shipping company that delivers the milk to the stores, the markets and groceries that stock and sell the milk, and the advertising agency that touts milk to consumers. Food preservation includes the handling or treating of food to prevent or slow down spoilage. Food processing involves transforming raw ingredients into packaged food, from fresh baked goods to frozen dinners. Although there are numerous benefits to both, preservation and processing also pose some concerns in terms of both nutrition and sustainability. Food preservation protects consumers from harmful or toxic food. There are many different ways to preserve food, such as curing, smoking, pickling, salting, fermenting, canning, and preserving fruit in the form of jam, drying, vacuum packing, pasteurization, and freezing and refrigeration. Preservation guards against foodborne illnesses and also protects the flavor, color, moisture content, or nutritive value of food. Irradiation involves treating food with ionizing radiation, which kills the bacteria and parasites that cause toxicity and disease. Foods currently approved for irradiation by the FDA include flour, fruits and vegetables, juices, herbs, spices, eggs, and meat and poultry. Studies have shown that irradiation can change the flavor, texture, color, odor, and nutritional content of food. For example, the yolks of irradiated eggs have less color than non-radiated eggs. Some people have concerns about the dangers of irradiation in their food. Food processing includes the methods and techniques used to transform raw ingredients into packaged food. As with preservation, there are different multiple ways in which foods can be processed. The pros and cons of food processing. Food processing has some important benefits, such as creating products that have a much longer shelf life than raw foods, protecting the health of consumers, and allowing for the easier shipment of foods. However, food processing can reduce the nutritional content of raw ingredients, and certain food additives that are included during processing, such as high fructose corn syrup, can affect the health of a customer. Food regulatory agencies work to protect the consumer and ensure the safety of our food. In 1996, Congress passed the Pure Food and Drugs Act, which led to the creation of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. Today, a number of agencies are in charge of monitoring how food is produced, processed, and packaged. Food regulation is divided among different agencies, primarily the FDA and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or the USDA. The public depends on these and other agencies to ensure that the food they purchase and consume from supermarkets, restaurants, and other sources is safe and healthy to eat. It can be confusing to know which agency monitors and manages which regulatory practice. The FDA enforces the safety of domestic and imported foods. It also monitors supplements, food labels, and claims that corporations make about the benefits of products and pharmaceutical drugs. The USDA develops and executes federal policy on farming and food to support farmers and ranchers, protects natural resources, promotes trade, and seeks to end hunger in the U.S. and abroad. It also assures food safety and in particular oversees the regulation of meat, poultry, and processed egg products. The Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, works to protect human health and the environment. It conducts environmental assessment, education, research and regulation, and also works to prevent pollution and protect natural resources. The Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points, or HACCP, is a system utilized by government agencies to identify potential hazards and prevent foodborne illnesses. The USDA uses HACCP to regulate meat, while the FDA uses it to monitor seafood and juice. Food additives are natural or synthetic substances added to a processed food product. There are more than 300 food additives used during food processing today. The most popular additives are benzoates, nitrites, sulfites, and sorbates, which prevent molds and yeast from growing on food. Some food additives help control acidity and alkalinity, while others enhance the color or flavor of the food. Some additives stabilize food and keep it from breaking down, while others add body or texture. The Food Additives Amendment of 1958 states that a manufacturer is responsible for demonstrating the safety of an additive before it can be approved. The Delaney Clause that was added to this legislation prohibits the approval of any additive found to cause cancer in animals or humans. Most additives are considered to be generally recognized as safe, a status that's determined by the FDA and referred to as GRAS. Many additives also make items more shelf-stable, help to prevent spoilage that results from changes in temperature, damage during distribution, and other adverse conditions, and protect consumers from exposure to rancid products and foodborne illnesses. However, some additives have been associated with certain diseases if consumed in large amounts. New technology has had a tremendous effect on the food we eat and the customs and culture related to food consumption. Microwaves are used to reduce cooking time or to heat up leftover food. Refrigerators and freezers allow produce to travel great distances and last longer. There is special food for astronauts that's appropriate for consumption in space. In the military, soldiers consume meals ready to eat, or MREs, which contain an entire meal in a single pouch. Genetically modified foods, also known as GM foods or GMOs, are plants or animals that have undergone some form of genetic engineering. In the U.S., much of the soybean, corn, and canola crops are genetically modified. Genetic modification involves the alteration of a plant's DNA, which allows farmers to cultivate plants with desirable characteristics. Certain modifications can be beneficial in resisting pests or pesticides, improving the ripening process, increasing the nutritional content of food, or providing resistance to common viruses. However, there are some possible side effects related to the consumption of GM foods, and those include an increase in allergenicity. Genetically modified plants may adversely affect the environment as well, and could lead to the contamination of non-genetically engineered organisms. Genetically modified foods fall under the purview of the EPA, the USDA, and the FDA. Enrichment of a food involves adding nutrients to restore those that were lost during processing. An example is that iron and certain B vitamins are added back to white flour once processed. Fortification is slightly different than enrichment. It involves adding new nutrients to enhance a food's nutritive value. An example of this is that folic acid is added to cereals and grain products, and calcium is added to some orange juice. Certain enrichment and fortification processes have been instrumental in protecting public health. These include adding iodine to salt, adding folic acid to wheat, and adding calcium to orange juice or soy milk. There is some concern that foods of little nutritive value will be fortified in an effort to improve their allure, such as soft drinks with added vitamins. People have begun to view their choices regarding diet and nutrition in light of their political views. Some choose to eat free-range chickens due to concerns about animal welfare. Some worry about the higher cost of organically produced food or find that those products are not available in their communities. Feelings about food have become a political minefield. More and more producers and consumers alike are speaking out about food to ensure that their interests are protected. Food politics can influence many stakeholders and interests, but always involve the production, regulation, inspection, distribution, and/or retail of food. Stakeholders in food politics include large and small farmers, large and small food companies, restaurants and other food service providers, food distributors, grocery stores and other retail outlets, consumers, trade associations, anti-hunger and nutrition advocates, and food industry lobbyists. Common disputes and controversies include genetic modification of plants, potential dangers of food additives, chemical runoff from large-scale farms, reliance on factory farming practices, use of pesticides in crop cultivation and antibiotics in livestock feed, use of sugar, salt, and other potentially unhealthy ingredients, promotion of fast food and junk food to children, and sanitary standards related to livestock. Government agencies regulate the proper processing and preparation of foods, as well as overseeing shipping and storage. The enforcement of regulations has been strongly influenced by public concern over food-related events, such as outbreaks of foodborne illnesses. Consumers have concerns about safety practices during the production and distribution of food. In January of 2011, the Food Safety Modernization Act was passed to grant more authority to the FDA to improve food safety. Government agencies play an important role in addressing hunger via federal food assistance programs. The agencies provide debit cards to consumers to help them purchase food, and they also provide other forms of aid to low-income adults and families who face hunger and nutritional deficits. The USDA has a dual role in the advancement of American agribusiness and the promotion of health and nutrition among the public, which can create conflicts of interest. There's no question that the USDA makes a great deal of effort to educate the public about diet and nutrition. Working with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the agency co-developed the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The USDA also implements all federal nutrition programs. The Farm Bill, introduced in 1990, is a massive piece of legislation that determines the farm and food policy of the federal government. It's responsible for policy related to federal food programs and other responsibilities of the USDA, a wide range of agricultural programs and provisions, including farm subsidies and rural development, international trade, commodity prices, environmental preservation, and food safety. The Farm Bill is updated and renewed every 5 years. It has since expanded to incorporate new issues, such as conservation, bioenergy, horticulture, and livestock provisions. The Farm Bill also dictates subsidies and other forms of agricultural funding for support. Farmers rely on this kind of support to offset varying crop yields and unfavorable weather conditions. The agricultural industry also depends on the federal government to provide some form of price control to guard against flooding the market and dragging down prices. Subsidies for corn production ultimately give rise to the use of high fructose corn syrup as a primary sweetener in a number of products today. Congress has pursued farm support programs to ensure that the country has continued access to abundant and affordable food. Some leaders question the effectiveness of government programs as well as the cost to taxpayers and consumers. Others question if continued farm support is even needed, and if it remains compatible with current economic objectives, domestic policy, trade policy, and regulatory restrictions. Statistics show that Americans spend more than $1.5 trillion on food each year at supermarkets, in restaurants, and from other food providers. According to the USDA, a thrifty family of 4 spends about $840 per month on groceries. Food cost and inflation. Agricultural production, processing and manufacturing, wholesale and retail distribution, and consumption all affect the rising cost of food. Rising agricultural commodity prices have led to concerns about food insecurity and hunger. While higher prices are generally good news for farmers, the effect on the poor in developing countries who spend a high proportion of their income on food can be devastating. Who bears the cost? The cost of our food is influenced by the energy required to produce and distribute food products from the farm field to supermarket to table. Rising prices also reflect the marketing and advertising of food. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, measures changes in the price level paid for goods and services. These include food and beverages. It's a closely watched statistic that is used in a variety of ways, including measuring inflation and regulating prices. Food prices and inflation disproportionately affect people at lower income levels. For the poorest people of the world, increasing prices can raise levels of hunger and starvation. In many developing countries where the cost for staple crops steadily rises, consumers have faced shortages or even the fear of shortages, which can result in hoarding and rioting. Bringing down prices would quell protests, but could take a decade or more to accomplish. Following World War II, grain prices fell steadily around the world for decades. The use of synthetic and mined fertilizers and pesticides and massive investment in planting and harvesting machines pushed crop yields up and crop prices down. Food became so inexpensive that we entered what came to be called the era of cheap food. However, by 2008, economic experts had declared that the era of cheap food was over. The rapid growth in farm output had slowed to the point that it failed to keep pace with population increases and rising affluence in once developing nations. The consequence of this imbalance has been huge spikes felt moderately in the West and to a much greater degree in the developing world. As a result, hunger has worsened for tens of millions of poor people around the world. Two major trends played a part in this shift. First, prosperity in India and China led to increased food consumption in general, but more specifically to increased meat consumption. Increased meat consumption has led to an increased demand for livestock feed, which has contributed to an overall rise in prices. The second trend relates to biofuels, which are made from a wide variety of crops such as corn and palm nuts, which increasingly are used to make fuel instead of to feed people. The world population in 2021 was 7.4 billion, and it's projected to grow to 9.4 billion by 2050. The rate of increase is particularly high in the developing world, and the increased population, along with poverty and political instability, are helping to foster long-term food insecurity. In the coming decades, farmers will need to greatly increase their output to meet the rising demand, while adapting to any future trends. Physiologically, hunger relates to appetite, and it's the body's response to a need for nourishment. However, the term hunger also relates to a weakened condition that is a consequence of a prolonged lack of food. People who suffer from this form of hunger typically experience malnourishment, along with poor growth and development. Adequate food intake that meets nutritional requirements is essential to achieve a healthy, productive lifestyle. However, millions of people in North America, not to mention globally, go hungry and are malnourished each year due to a recurring and involuntary lack of food. In 2020, 811 million people around the world were classified as hungry. Food security and food insecurity are terms that focus on status and affect hunger statistics. Malnutrition refers to the deficiencies that a hungry person experiences. Most American households are considered to be food secure, which means they have adequate access to food and consume enough nutrients to achieve a healthy lifestyle. A minority of U.S. households experiences food insecurity at certain points during the year, which means their access to food is limited due to a lack of money or other resources. Food insecurity is defined as not having adequate access to food that meets nutritional needs. 85.2% of households with children were food secure in 2020. In 7.2% of households with children, only adults were food insecure. 10.5%, 13.8 million, of U.S. households were food insecure at some time during 2020. African American and Hispanic households experience food insecurity at much higher rates than the national average. Households with limited resources employ a variety of methods to increase their access to adequate food. Some families purchase junk food and fast food, cheaper options that are also very unhealthy. Other families who struggle with food security supplement the groceries they purchase by participating in government assistance programs. Families may also obtain food from emergency providers such as food banks and soup kitchens in their communities. A person living in a food insecure household may suffer from malnutrition, which results from a failure to meet nutrient requirements resulting from too little food or not enough key nutrients. There are two basic types of malnutrition. Macronutrient deficiency relates to the lack of adequate protein, which is required for cell growth, maintenance, and repair. Micronutrient deficiency relates to inadequate vitamin and mineral intake. Even overweight and obese people can suffer from this kind of malnutrition if they eat foods that don't meet all of their nutritional needs. Worldwide, three main groups are at most risk for hunger. The rural, poor, and developing nations who also lack access to electricity and safe drinking water, the urban poor who live in expanding cities and lack the means to buy food, and victims of earthquakes, hurricanes, and other natural and man-made catastrophes. In the U.S., it also includes low-income families and the working poor, who are employed but have incomes below the federal poverty level. Senior citizens are also a major at-risk group. More than 6 million senior citizens in the U.S. face the threat of hunger. Many elderly people are frail and isolated, and many also have low incomes, limited resources, and difficulty purchasing or preparing food due to health issues or poor mobility, which affects their ability to meet their dietary requirements. One of the groups that struggles with hunger are the millions of homeless people across North America. A recent study reported that the majority of reporting cities saw an increase in the number of homeless families. Hunger and homelessness often go hand in hand as homeless families and adults turn to soup kitchens or food pantries or resort to begging for food. Household food insecurity affected 14.8% of households with children in 2020. Hunger delays their growth and development and affects their educational progress because it's more difficult for hungry or malnourished students to concentrate in school. Children who are undernourished are most susceptible to contracting diseases such as measles and pneumonia. The federal government has established a number of programs that work to alleviate hunger and ensure that many low-income families receive the nutrition they require to live a healthy life. The Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010 authorized funding and set the policy for several key core programs that provide a safety net for food-insecure children across the U.S. The positives of this plan were 1.4 million students were served, increased access to school meals, and improved nutrition quality. The federal poverty level is used to determine eligibility for food assistance programs. This monetary figure is the minimum amount that a family would need to acquire shelter, food, clothing, and other necessities. USDA food assistance programs. Government food and nutrition assistance programs that are organized and operated by the USDA work to increase food security. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as the Food Stamp Program, provides monthly benefits for low-income households to purchase approved food items at authorized stores. In an average month, they provide benefits to more than 40 million people in the United States. Clients receive an electronic benefit transfer or EBT card with a certain allocation of money for each month that can be used only for food. The Special Supplemental Program for Women, Infants, and Children, or WIC, provides food packages to pregnant and breastfeeding women, as well as to infants and children up to age 5, to promote adequate intake for healthy growth and development. In 2020, WIC served approximately 6.2 million participants per month. The National School Lunch Program, NSLP, and School Breakfast Program, SBP, ensure that children in elementary and middle schools receive at least one healthy meal each school day, or two if both the NSLP and SBP are provided. In 2010, the programs provided meals to an average of 31.6 million children each school day. The Child and Adult Care Food Program, CACFP, offers meals and snacks at child care centers, daycare homes, and after-school programs. Through CACFP, more than 3.2 million children and 112,000 adults receive nutritious meals and snacks each day. The Summer Food Service Program provides meals to children during summer break. Head Start is a health and development program for children ages 3 to 5 from low-income families. Launched in 1965, it is one of the longest-running poverty-related programs in the United States. Head Start programs include education, meals, snacks, and access to other social services and health guidance. Meals on Wheels delivers meals to elderly people who have difficulty buying or making their own food because of poor health or limited mobility. Beginning in Philadelphia in the 1950s, it's the oldest and largest program dedicated to addressing the nutritional needs of senior citizens. Each day, Meals on Wheels deliver more than 1 million meals across the United States. In recent years, consumers have become more conscientious about the decisions they make in the supermarket. Organically grown food is the fastest growing segment of the food industry. Farmers markets and chains that are health food oriented are thriving in many parts of North America. Shoppers have begun to pay more attention to the effect of food on their health and well-being. In the past, families routinely sat down together to eat dinner, but this tradition has fallen by the wayside. In 1900, 2% of meals were eaten outside the home. By 2018, that figure had risen to 44%. Today, families eat together about 3 times a week. The meal often lasts less than 20 minutes, spent eating a microwave meal in front of the TV. However, recent studies have shown that home-cooked family meals really matter. Family meals usually lead to the consumption of healthy food packed with nutrition, strengthening familial bonds, improving family communication, and helping young children learn table manners. Increased frequency of family meals has also been associated with certain developmental assets, such as support, boundaries and expectations, commitment to learning, positive values, and social competency. Also, when families prepare food together, parents or caregivers can also use the time to teach children about the ways their dietary selections can affect their health. Teenagers' diet choices are influenced by the family's economic status, the availability of food inside and outside the home, and established traditions. Studies have found links between the prevalence of family meals during adolescence and the establishment of healthy dietary behaviors by young adulthood. Many of today's teenagers make food selections on their own, which often means eating junk food or fast food on the go. Adolescents who regularly consume family meals or have done so in the past are more likely to eat breakfast and to eat more fruits and vegetables. They're 42% less likely to drink alcohol, 50% less likely to smoke cigarettes, and 66% less likely to use marijuana. Regular family dinners also help protect teens from bulimia, anorexia, and diet pills. In addition, the frequency of family meals was inversely related to lower academic scores and incidence of depression or suicide. Sustainable agricultural practices provide healthy, nutritious food for the consumers of today, while preserving natural resources for the consumers of tomorrow. Sustainability not only has economic and environmental benefits, but also personal benefits, including reduced exposure to pesticides, antibiotics, and growth hormones. Sustainable eaters do all of the following. They consume less processed food, eat more home-cooked meals, consume a plant-based diet, buy organic food products, and buy locally grown foods. Eating fresh, healthy foods not only stimulates your taste buds, but also can improve your quality of life and help you to live longer. Nutrition also contributes to longevity and plays an important role in preventing a number of diseases and disorders, from obesity to cardiovascular disease. Some dietary changes can also help to manage certain chronic conditions, including high blood pressure and diabetes. A doctor or a nutritionist can provide guidance to determine the dietary changes needed to ensure and maintain your health. According to the World Health Organization, cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death on the planet. A healthy diet can go a long way toward preventing a number of conditions that contribute to cardiovascular malfunction, including high levels of blood cholesterol and narrowed arteries. Reducing your intake of trans fat, saturated fat, and sodium can considerably lower the risk of cardiovascular disease, or manage further incidence and artery blockages in current heart patients. It's also beneficial to eat a diet high in fiber and to include more omega-3 fatty acids, such as the kind found in mackerel, salmon, and other oily fish. For those with high blood pressure, it can be beneficial to follow the same recommendations as those for heart patients. It's crucial to reduce the intake of sodium to prevent pressure levels from continuing to rise. It can also be helpful to increase potassium intake. However, patients should check with a doctor or dietitian first, especially if there are kidney disease concerns. Dietary approaches to stop hypertension, or DASH. The DASH diet is highly recommended to lower blood pressure. This program promotes an increased intake of potassium and calcium by emphasizing fruits, vegetables, whole grains, low-fat dairy products, and limited amounts of meat. It also recommends decreasing the intake of saturated fat and sugar. The rising rates of diabetes have triggered a health crisis in the United States and around the world. There are 2 types of this disease. Type 1 diabetes, the body doesn't produce enough insulin. In type 2 diabetes, the pancreas produces insulin, but the cells don't respond to it. Obesity and genetics are major factors for the development of type 2 diabetes. Nutrition plays a role in lowering the risk of type 2 diabetes or managing either form of the disease. It's a myth that there is one diabetes diet that every patient should follow. Diabetics should keep track of the foods they consume that contain carbohydrates to manage and control blood glucose levels. A dietitian can help patients create a specific meal plan that fits their preferences, lifestyle, and health goals. Excessive weight gain has become an epidemic. Over two-thirds of American adults are overweight, and 1 in 3 is obese. Obesity in particular puts people at risk for a host of complications, including type 2 diabetes, heart disease, high cholesterol, hypertension, osteoarthritis, and some forms of cancer. There is no single cause of obesity and no single way to treat it, but a healthy, nutritious diet is generally the first step, including consuming more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains, and lean meats and dairy products. Nutrition is very important in managing end-stage renal disease, and a patient with this condition should discuss a meal plan with a dietitian and a physician. Certain macro and micronutrients will need to be monitored closely, including protein, potassium, sodium, and phosphorus. Kidney patients must also keep track of their caloric intake, and dietitians may recommend consuming more fast-releasing carbohydrates and low-saturated fats to boost the number of calories consumed each day. Certain cancers are linked to being overweight or obese. Foods linked to decreased cancer risk include whole grains, high-fiber foods, fruits, and vegetables. Foods linked to increased cancer risk include processed meats and excess alcohol. Digestive disorders can include constipation, heartburn or gastroesophageal reflux disease, inflammatory bowel disease, including Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, and irritable bowel syndrome. For many of them, diet can play an important role in prevention and management. For example, getting enough fiber and fluids in your diet and being active can help to alleviate constipation. In the past, people's culture and location determined the foods they ate and the manner in which they prepared their meals. Today, most people have access to a wide variety of food and can prepare them in any way they choose. However, customs and traditions still strongly influence diet and cuisine in most areas of the world. In this section, you will read a few examples of cuisines in different countries and regions, demonstrating differences and preferences. We'll also compare common dietary choices in each region for a key meal, breakfast. Typical foods in South and Central America include quinoa, which has a high protein and fiber content, is gluten-free, and is particularly tasty cooked in pilafs. Another popular grain product is a tortilla. Fruits and vegetables are common, including corn, avocados, yucca, peppers, potatoes, mangoes, and papayas. Rice, beans, and a soft cheese known as queso fresco are also common. Now that you've read through the slides on diets around the world, let's discuss the diversity of palates and habits. Around the globe, people enjoy different foods and different flavors. In some cultures, the main dishes are meat-based, while others focus on plant-based meals. You can also find different staples in different regions of the world, including rice, potatoes, pasta, corn, beans, root vegetables, and many kinds of grains. Different flavors are also popular on different parts of the planet, from sweet to salty to sour to spicy. People tend to eat what grows or lives nearby. In many developing countries, a large part of the diet is composed of cereal grains, starchy roots, and legumes. A number of common staples are consumed worldwide, including rice, corn, wheat, potatoes, cassava, and beans. Income also plays a major role in what foods people eat and how they prepare them. As a consequence of rising incomes, the average global calorie consumption has increased to record levels in recent years. Among developing countries, the daily intake of calories per person rose by nearly 25% from the early 1970s to the mid-1990s. People in the Western world were able to increase their consumption of meat and poultry, fruits and vegetables, and fats and oils. Those gains were minimal in the poorest countries, where many continue to struggle with hunger and a limited diet. People from different parts of the world consume their food in different ways, and what is common in one country may be considered impolite in another. Some eat with their fingers, while in others they use a fork. Some slurp their soup, while in others they quietly sip. Some eat off individual plates, while in others they sit at a table with a large communal plate from which everyone eats. No matter where you travel, you will find that food production, purchase, and preparation affect all facets of life, from health and economics to religion and culture. It's vital for people from all walks of life to consider the choices they make regarding food, and how those decisions affect not only their bodies, but also their world. Chef Alice Waters said, "Remember, food is precious. Good food can only come from good ingredients. Its proper price includes the cost of preserving the environment and paying fairly for the labor of the people who produce it. Food should never be taken for granted."